Technologies that will make Paradice engineering a reality. But it's all very well talking about future generations, genetic engineering, radically rewriting our genetic source code, but in the short run there is going to be scope for designer drugs. Now, designer drugs have all sorts of pitfalls. We needn't go into some of them there, but for people who are alive right now who can't start editing their own genetic source code, frequently the only way you can change your default state of consciousness is via taking drugs, which may be as simple as taking caffeine or modafinil, or perhaps so-called antidepressant or mood brightener. Now, I very much hope that with the growth of understanding of neuroscience, it will be possible to design safe and effective designer drugs that don't have some of the pitfalls of existing antidepressants and anti-anxiety agents. That if we're talking about autosomal gene therapy, realistically this is probably a couple of decades away for most people. Other technologies, nanotechnology. Sometimes people ask what is the likely role of nanotechnology. One stumbling block for me when I was trying to understand how it might be feasible to extend the abolitionist project to the rest of the living world was the deep oceans. One can understand how in principle it's possible to intervene in ecosystems, fertility regulation, micromanagement, the way that every cubic meter of the planet will in principle be computationally accessible to micromanagement, surveillance and control. But what about the deep oceans? Is it really going to be feasible to ensure that all unpleasant experience, all suffering is abolished? By all suffering, I mean all involuntary suffering. And it was reading Drexler's Engines of Creation that made me realise that, yes, self-replicating nanobots patrolling the oceans would be feasible later this century and beyond. Of course, the abolition of suffering was not Drexler's primary focus, and he doesn't discuss this. But for me, this was, late teens. This was the critical breakthrough. Until then, I could not see how it was going to be technically feasible to completely abolish suffering. I say completely abolish suffering. This is on Earth. We do not know whether there is life, sentient life, elsewhere in our galaxy, or indeed elsewhere in our Hubble volume. In theory, if such life does exist, our sphere of ethical responsibility may be far wider than planet Earth. But yes, on Earth at least, nanotechnology I think is going to be critical for patrolling the oceans. There are all sorts of applications that one can envisage for nanotech within the human body, but although in one sense clearly our emotions are complex, if one actually looks at our core emotions as shaped by evolution compared to our cognition, their actual roots, their biological basis in the limbic system and their projections to the neocortex are actually much simpler, and it's possible to tell even now a relatively convincing story about how we can recalibrate, genetically tweak and add and subtract from our emotional palette to enrich our lives without invoking self-replicating nanobots or anything like that. It's much simpler in some ways to genetically tweak, to amplify, to overexpress, to in some cases actually simply phase out something like jealousy, for example. Why do we want to preserve either the raw feels of jealousy or the functional role. But none of this need involve nanotechnology, even though it's of course quite possible that molecular nanotechnology will be a ubiquitous feature of our lives later this century and beyond.